Well, thank you so much, Director Dai, Madam Lim. Thank you for your gracious sponsorship, that of Yiti Tire. It's a very great honor, Director Dai, to collaborate so closely with you and your Energy Research Institute. Your leadership in energy efficiency is supporting the emergence of the beautiful China that we all want. And thank you all for the honor of sharing with you the findings of an ambitious synthesis of American energy solutions that I think may help you in China as we learn also from your remarkable experience. I work at Rocky Mountain Institute. It is an independent, non-political, non-profit think and do tank that creates a clean, prosperous, and secure energy future. 60 colleagues and I did this study during 6 quarters, which with much help from industry in both data and peer review. We published the results 2.5 years ago in English as a graphics-rich business book called Reinventing Fire. And I'm very proud that today, through the great work of our colleagues at Henan Science and Technology Press, it is published in Chinese for the first time. Today, I'd like to summarize what we found. In America, we have a strange public conversation about energy that boils down to a kind of multiple choice test. Would you rather die of A, oil wars, or B, climate change, or C, nuclear holocaust, or D, all of the above? Oh, I missed one. How about E, none of the above? This is the choice we are seldom offered. But what if we could make energy do our work without working our undoing? Could we have fuel without fear? Could we reinvent fire? And my colleagues and I chose this big poetic title because long ago fire made us human, then fossil fuels made us modern. But now we need a new fire that makes us safe, secure, healthy, and durable. This has now become possible. In fact, it works better and costs less than what we are doing. So let's see how this would work, say, for the United States. Now, 4/5 of the world's energy still comes from burning each year 19 cubic kilometers of the rotted remains of primeval swamp goo. These fossil fuels have created our wealth and built our civilization and enriched the lives of billions of people. But their rising costs to our security, economy, environment, health are eroding, if not outweighing their benefits. So we need a new fire. And switching from the old fire to the new fire changes 2 big stories, oil and electricity, each of which releases 2/5 of the fossil carbon going into the air. These 2 stories are distinct. In the United States, for example, less than 1% of our electricity is made from oil. About 1/3 is made from coal. But their uses are similarly concentrated. 3/4 of U.S. oil runs transportation, 3/4 of electricity powers buildings, the rest of both runs factories. So very efficient transportation and buildings and factories can save oil and coal and natural gas that can displace both. In China, of course, industry has a bigger role. But today's energy system is not just inefficient, it is also disconnected, aging, dirty, insecure, so it needs refurbishment. But by 2050, it could become efficient, connected, and distributed, with elegantly frugal vehicles and buildings and factories, all relying on a secure, modern, and resilient electricity system. So we can eliminate our addiction to oil and coal by 2050 in the United States and use 1/3 less natural gas while switching to 3 times more efficient use and 3/4 renewable supplies. And I suspect China could do much the same or even better. Now, by 2050, this transition could end up costing the United States $5 trillion less in net present value than business as usual, assuming that carbon emissions and all other hidden or external costs are worth 0, a conservatively low estimate. Yet this cheaper energy system could support a 158% bigger, that is 2.6 times bigger, U.S. economy, all without oil or coal or nuclear energy. And this transition, we found, would need no new inventions and no new federal laws or taxes or mandates or subsidies going around Washington gridlock. So I'm going to tell you how the United States, for example, could get completely off oil and coal, $5 trillion cheaper, with no act of Congress led by business for profit. Many policy changes are needed to support such a transition, but this could be actually done administratively or at a state level, like your provinces, which is where we make most of our energy policy anyway. And the idea is to use our most effective institutions, which in my country are private enterprise co-evolving with civil society and sped by military innovation, to go around our least effective institutions. Every country has a different way of doing things. Here you have very effective central government, which we do not. But I think in any case, and in either country, whether you care most about profits, jobs, competitive advantage, or about national security, or about environmental stewardship, climate protection, public health, Reinventing Fire makes sense and makes money. President Eisenhower reportedly said that expanding the boundaries of a tough problem makes it soluble by including more parts of the solution. So in Reinventing Fire, we integrated all 4 sectors that use energy: transportation, buildings, industry, and electricity. And we integrated 4 kinds of innovation, not just technology, but also design, the way technologies are combined. And not only public policy, but also business strategy. These combinations give much more than the sum of their parts, and they create some deeply disruptive business opportunities. Where should we start? Well, half of U.S. oil fuels automobiles. So let's start by making automobiles oil-free. 2/3 of the energy needed to make a typical car is caused by its weight. And every unit of fuel that we save at the wheels by taking out weight or drag or rolling resistance of tires saves another 6 units of energy that we no longer need to waste getting it to the wheels. So it saves 7 units of fuel at the tank. So taking out weight is critical, but for the past quarter century, epidemic obesity has made our cars gain weight twice as fast as we have. Now they are over 2 tons. But today we have ultralight, ultra-strong materials, light metals, carbon fiber composites, that can make dramatic weight savings build up like a snowball and can make autos simpler and cheaper to build. Lighter and more slippery autos need less force to move them, so their engine becomes smaller. We can then afford to electrify them because we need 2 or 3 times fewer of the costly batteries or fuel cells. And with those smaller, lighter, cheaper batteries, for example, the price of the electric car can fall to roughly today's level. And of course, the driving cost per kilometer is much lower from the beginning. So that specific sequence of innovations can transform automakers from wringing tiny savings out of essentially Victorian steel stamping and engine technologies to the steeply falling costs of 3 mutually reinforcing technologies: the ultralight materials, ways to make them into structures, and electric propulsion. And if you have 3 steep and synergistic learning curves that reinforce each other while your competitor is out on the flat part of one old learning curve, probably you win. This strategy also systematically takes all the main kinds of risk out of the auto business. Now, the sales of such vehicles can grow and their prices can drop even faster with a temporary policy called a fee-bate. That means rebates for efficient new cars paid for by fees on inefficient new cars. This is already done in Singapore and 5 European countries in different forms. The biggest such program in France in its first 2 years tripled the speed of improving auto efficiency. And this resulting shift to electric autos will be as game-changing as shifting from small refinements in typewriters to the dramatic Moore's Law-driven gains in computers. Computers and electronics are now America's biggest industry. Typewriter makers have disappeared. So vehicle fitness, taking the obesity out of the car, offers a new automotive competitive strategy that doubles the oil savings, but also makes affordable the electrification that can save the rest of the oil. Many countries could lead this next automotive revolution. I hope China will do so. The formidable barriers are much more cultural than they are technical or economic. So we're helping automakers and suppliers in several continents to overcome them. The current leader is Germany. Volkswagen has begun low-volume production of this 1 liter per 100 kilometer carbon fiber plug-in hybrid car. BMW is ramping up mid-volume production of this carbon fiber electric car. They've confirmed that its carbon fiber is paid for by needing fewer batteries, and their president says, "We do not intend to be a typewriter maker," because he can look across Munich to where Olympia used to make excellent typewriters. Audi has shown a carbon fiber plug-in hybrid sport utility vehicle concept car rated at less than 0.9 liters per 100 kilometers. There are some interesting things that American industry can bring to this party. I brought along today my carbon cap, actually a test piece for military and mining safety helmets that have been shipping for several years. And this was made in 1 minute 7 or 8 years ago by a process some of my colleagues invented. And you can tell from the sound, this is extremely strong and stiff. Let's pass it around. Don't worry about dropping it. It's tougher than titanium. The journalist Tom Friedman actually hit it with a sledgehammer as hard as he could, and he couldn't even scuff the surface. Now, we now have techniques that can make complex 2 by 2 meter parts out of such materials in 1 minute. And that means, that's the standard speed for automaking, that if we made all American cars in this way, for example, cars and light trucks, we could save 4/5 of the capital needed for automaking. We could save a lot of lives because these materials absorb 6 to 12 times as much crash energy per kilogram as steel. And we could also save oil equivalent just in the United States to 1.5 Saudi Arabias or half an OPEC at a cost of $18 a barrel. Actually, the cost is to pay for the electrification because, as I'll show in a moment, the ultralighting is approximately free. And those saved barrels, negabarrels if you like, are domestic, carbon-free, and inexhaustible, and of course completely secure. They don't run out. Now, this is a carbon fiber SUV that a spin-off from our institute designed with 2 European Tier 1 firms 14 years ago. And it would get about 3.6 liters per 100 kilometers on gasoline or 2.1 on hydrogen. But while doing this in an uncompromised way with under a 2-year payback to the retail buyer, it also would show how the ultralighting can be approximately free. You see, if you look inside, the structure is like an airframe. It is suspended from rings, not built up from a tub. So it's extremely strong and stiff. Each part is made with one low-pressure die set. In a steel SUV, you would have 10 or 20 times more body parts, each made with an average of 4 progressive steel stamping dies. So now you're saving about 98 or 99% of the tooling cost. And also, each part can be lifted with 1 or 2 hands with no hoist. This biggest part on the side I can briefly lift with 1 finger. And the parts then snap precisely together for bonding without needing the robotic body shop. If you lay color in the mold, you don't need the paint shop either. So that's where the 80% saving in capital cost comes from. And the propulsion system gets 2/3 smaller, and hence lighter and cheaper. And all these savings together pay for the carbon fiber. That's why the ultralighting can be approximately free. And the carbon fiber itself is probably about to get a lot cheaper. If you want to know how far this can go, Toyota 7 years ago showed this carbon fiber concept car that has the interior volume of a Prius, but half the fuel use and 1/3 the weight. It weighs 420 kilograms as a plug-in hybrid. The day before it was shown, the world's biggest maker of carbon fiber announced a big factory to mass-produce carbon fiber car parts for Toyota, not previously a phrase much heard in the industry. And now, with many other automakers jumping on board to various development programs, Volkswagen and BMW will soon have worthy competitors, and not only in Japan. So what if such cars were made in China, jumping past steel cars as you expand your car industry to help solve the air and oil and climate problems simultaneously? This would be wonderful global leadership. And such radical vehicle of fitness enables all kinds of advanced propulsion systems. For example, if you look inside that fuel cell SUV we designed 14 years ago, you find it's so efficient that it can cruise on the highway with the same power delivered to the wheels that today's SUVs use on a hot afternoon to run the air conditioner. And for this reason, the hydrogen tanks for a 530 kilometer driving range get 3 times smaller, so they fit nicely. They leave a lot of room for people and cargo, 5 cubic meters of cargo, 5 adults in comfort. And also the fuel cell itself gets 3 times smaller, so not only do you not need a storage breakthrough, but you can pay 3 times more for the smaller fuel cell per kilowatt, and Therefore, given the way in which cost drops as you make more, you could probably have about 30 times less production volume to reach a competitive cost of the fuel cell. So this cuts 10 or 20 years off the deployment time. Now the same physics and the same business logic apply to big vehicles too. Walmart's heavy trucks are already using smarter designs and logistics to haul each case of products using 46% less fuel than they used 9 years ago. And just the technological fuel saving in heavy trucks can rise to 2/3. And that plus the 3 to 5 times more efficient airplanes being developed at places like Boeing and NASA and MIT could add up to a nearly $1 trillion fuel saving for the United States. But of course you could do the same in China. And one of our spin-offs developed a light commercial van or truck of the kind that is so common in China for delivering goods. And it could do about 2.5 liters per 100 kilometers made of aluminium without even using carbon fiber, and have a very convincing business case with no subsidy. There's another aspect not shown here about this revolution in vehicle efficiency, light and heavy vehicles, and that is that the US military is undergoing a revolution in the efficiency of its land and sea and air vehicles for purely military reasons. But our military uses only 2% of the nation's fuel. This means that the technologies developed there can come back to the civilian sector and make our cars, trucks, and planes, which use over 50 times as much oil, much more efficient much sooner. So I've been driving that revolution for about 30 years, and it's flowering beautifully now. Well, this is much like the way military research created the internet, the global positioning system, the jet engine industry, the microchip industry. Only this time, it can get our country, and in due course your country, off oil. So nobody needs to fight over oil. We can have neg emissions in the Persian Gulf or the South China Sea, mission unnecessary. And the warfighters really like this idea. Also, as we design and build vehicles better, we can use them smarter. This is a graph of US traffic congestion with the morning and evening rush hours. If this were an electricity load shape, we would use a lot of IT-enabled pricing and smart grid and demand response to reduce those peaks. But by not yet doing this for road traffic, we are wasting many billions of dollars a year in idle people, idle vehicles, and idle road, not to mention more bad air. So we don't need to just sit back and watch traffic double, which is the official US forecast. Actually, it's going the other way, because we have 4 proven methods to reduce needless driving. We can charge drivers for their road infrastructure by the kilometer, not by the liter. We can use some smart information technology to enable car sharing and ride sharing and enhance public transport. We can use smart growth and new urbanist land use patterns so that more people are already where they want to be and don't always need to go somewhere else. And we can also use some smart IT to make traffic free flowing. And when you put all those things together in the United States, we could get the same access with 46 to 84% less driving, saving another $0.4 trillion, plus another $0.3 trillion from smarter use of trucks. So 40 years from now, a far more mobile US economy, notice how much more mobile at the top, could use no oil. And saving or displacing each barrel for just $25, rather than buying it for over $100, would save $4 trillion in present value, counting all of its hidden costs at zero as we did. Or if we counted just the hidden economic and military costs of U.S. oil dependence, that would be a $12 trillion saving. So to get mobility without oil, to phase out the oil, we can first get efficient and then switch fuels. So besides the savings in the government forecast, vehicle fitness gets a lot more, and we can save a little more from more productive use of vehicles. And then those 1 or 2 liter equivalent per 100 kilometer cars can use any mixture of hydrogen fuel cells and electricity and advanced biofuels. The trucks and airplanes could realistically use advanced biofuels or hydrogen, or the trucks could even burn natural gas, but none of them will need oil. And any biofuels the United States might need, just 3 million barrels a day, could be made 2/3 from wastes and would not need any cropland and would not harm soil or climate. In fact, we would pay the farmers and ranchers to take the carbon out of the air and put it back in fertile soil where it belongs. So our little team speeds up these oil savings by institutional acupuncture. Where the business logic is congested and not flowing properly, we insert little needles in selected points in partners like Ford and Walmart and the Pentagon and get the chi flowing again, the entrepreneurial juice. And in most of the 6 sectors that need to be transformed, this long transition is already so well underway that even 5 years ago, mainstream analysts were starting to see peak oil not in supply but in demand. And that's because, as happened with whale oil in the 1850s, oil is becoming uncompetitive even at low prices before it becomes unavailable even at high prices. This is now recognized by, say, The Economist, the Financial Times, Deutsche Bank, Citibank. But the electrified autos that help this happen do not need to add new burdens to the electricity system. Rather, when smart autos exchange electricity and information through smart buildings with smart grids, they are adding to the grid some flexibility and distributed storage that help the grid to accept varying solar and wind power. So electrified autos make the auto and electricity problems easier to solve together than separately. And they also converge the oil story with our second big story, saving electricity and then making it differently. And those twin revolutions in electricity are bringing more numerous and profound and diverse disruptions than in any other sector, because essentially we have 21st century technology and speed colliding head-on with 20th and 19th century institutions, rules, and cultures. Now, changing how we make electricity gets easier if we need less of it. Today, it is mostly wasted, and the efficiency techniques keep improving faster than we install them. So the unbought reserve of potential savings, think of them as negawatts, saved watts, keeps getting bigger and cheaper. But as buildings and industry start to catch up and get efficient faster than they grow, the electricity use in the United States that's come down from about 10% a year to roughly 0, and instead of increasing, say, 1% a year as officially forecast, it could decrease 1% a year after allowing for the extra use by the efficient cars. And indeed, U.S. electricity use peaked in 2007, just as gasoline use did. So our economy keeps growing, but our electricity used per dollar GDP has already fallen, I think, 6 or 8% in the past 3 years. It fell 3.4% just in 2012. And we can keep it shrinking by reasonably accelerating existing trends. By 2050, we found US buildings, which I'll remind you use 3/4 of our electricity, can triple or quadruple their energy productivity, saving $1.4 trillion net present value with a 33% internal rate of return. So the savings are worth 4 times their cost. Industry can also accelerate and double its energy productivity with a 21% internal rate of return. And to do all this by 2050, we would just need to ramp up the national adoption of energy efficiency by 2030 to levels that our Pacific Northwest states already achieved 9 years ago. China could achieve such efficiencies even more easily than the United States because you can build things right rather than fix them later, as we must do. We've already built our cities. You're still building a lot. Especially if you use integrative design, as we call it, to make very big energy savings cost less than small or no savings, turning diminishing returns into expanding returns. That's how the 2010 retrofit, whose design I co-led, is saving 2/5 of the energy used by the Empire State Building. We remanufactured its 6,500 windows on site in a temporary window factory on a vacant floor into so-called super windows that insulate 4 times better, but also are almost perfect in letting in light without heat. And that plus better lights and office equipment and other things cut the maximum cooling load by 1/3. But then we could renovate smaller chillers instead of adding bigger ones, saving $17 million of capital cost and paying for most of these improvements and cutting the payback time to just 3 years. That is the same payback time that a major energy service company offered, but they were going to save 6 times less than we did because they optimized components individually, but we optimized the whole building as a system. We've just finished the cost-effective retrofit of a difficult 48-year-old U.S. central government building that's expected to save 70% of its energy, making it probably more efficient than the best new U.S. office building. Let's try a very different kind of building. My own house, 2,200 meters up in the Rocky Mountains, near Aspen, Colorado, where temperatures used to go down to minus 44 Celsius. So it's a Manchurian or a Tibetan climate. And we can get 39 days of continuous cloud there in the middle of winter. And yet, this house helped inspire 32,000 European passive buildings that, like ours, have no heating system. They don't need it, and they have roughly normal construction cost, and they don't need to look like this to work like this. Now let's go inside this atrium under glass that insulates like about 16 sheets of glass, but looks like 2 and costs less than 3. And it's a banana jungle. This is what it looks like in a February snowstorm. These are 2 of our latest banana crops, which weighed 30 kilograms and harvested themselves by pulling down the tree. And at the moment I have 7 crops ripening, numbers 48 through 54. And there's no furnace. Now, in 1984, when I moved in, this house was saving about 99% of the normal space and water heating energy, 90% of the household electricity, half the water, all with a 10-month payback. Today's technologies, which we have now retrofitted, are much better. So we're measuring about 300 data streams to find out how much better. The trouble is that the measuring equipment seems to be using more electricity than the lights and appliances we're measuring. Now, this design approach works in any climate. It has been used to eliminate air conditioning up to at least 46 Celsius with better comfort and lower construction cost. That's in a fairly dry climate, but in the hot, steamy climate of Bangkok, like southeastern China, it has saved 90% of air conditioning energy in a new house that has better comfort and exactly normal construction cost. Probably about everybody in China lives in a climate somewhere between Bangkok and where I live in Colorado. And whatever the climate, the key is integrative design that gives many benefits from each expenditure. This white arch that holds up the middle of my house has 12 different functions, but only one cost. Integrative design can also increase the $500 billion of conventional energy savings in industry. The big chemical company Dow, for example, has invested $1 billion to save energy and so far got back $9 billion of savings. But there's a lot more to do. For example, 3/5 of the world's electricity runs motors, half of that runs pumps and fans, and those can all be improved. But first we should capture bigger and cheaper savings that are normally ignored. For example, pumps, the biggest use of motors, move liquid through pipes. A typical industrial pumping loop for a factory here in Shanghai was redesigned to use at least 86% less pumping energy, not by getting better pumps or motors or controls, but just by replacing long, thin, crooked pipes with fat, short, straight pipes. This also shrinks the pumping equipment and its capital cost. So this isn't new technology. It's just rearranging our metal furniture as designers. In my own house, we did this in some new piping recently and saved about 97% of the pumping energy, and it cost less. So what does this mean for the electricity that's 3/5 used in motors? Well, from the coal burnt in the power plant, there are so many compounding losses that only 1/10 of the original fuel energy comes out the pipe as flow. But we can take those compounding losses from left to right and turn them around backwards into compounding savings from right to left, and then every unit of flow or friction that we save in the pipe compounds back to save 10 units of fuel and cost and pollution and climate change back at the power station. And as we go upstream, the components get smaller and cheaper. So our team has lately found such snowballing energy savings by redesigning over $40 billion worth of industrial facilities, from this Hewlett-Packard data center and Texas Instruments chip fab to Rio Tinto and Anglo-American mines and Shell hydrocarbon facilities and so on. And typically, our retrofit designs save about 30 to 60% of the energy with paybacks of a few years. And in new facilities, the savings are a little bigger, maybe 40 to 90 odd percent, with almost always a lower capital cost. Now, when we need more electricity because of these savings in industry and in buildings, it's much easier to switch our energy supply, particularly to renewables, in which, thank you for doing this, China leads the world in explosively growing the volume and cutting the cost. So on a logarithmic scale, these are the market prices of photovoltaic modules and wind farms since 1980. And actually, both of these technologies now compete with the most efficient gas-fired power plants in the US, with all our supposedly cheap gas. In windy parts of the United States, wind power prices have fallen as low as 130 renminbi per megawatt hour. But today, in over 20 of the United States, entrepreneurs will put solar power on your roof with no down payment and beat your electric bill. And the prices continue to drop. Actually, American installation is not as efficient as in Germany and Australia, where they put in the system for half the cost that we pay, even though we all buy the same equipment. But as the global solar and wind installations keep growing incredibly fast, they and some minor modern renewables adding over 80 billion watts a year and getting $250 billion a year of private investment in each of the past 3 years. As renewables take already since 2008 half the new market for power plants worldwide. This is a fundamental change. Solar power is scaling faster than cell phones. And you notice this is the opposite of what's happening for the traditional power plants. For nuclear plants, the net additions of capacity each year fell below zero even before the Fukushima accident. And the orders for coal plants are also dwindling because they also cost too much and have too much financial risk. There's really no business case for these big thermal plants. And yet we're often told that only the coal and nuclear plants can keep the lights on because they are 24/7, whereas solar and wind are variable and thus supposedly not dependable. But this is, it turns out, not an accurate picture for two reasons. One is that variable does not mean unpredictable. In blue, you see the forecast that the French grid operator did for the output of all the wind power stations, and in red, the actual output 1 day later. We can forecast solar and wind output now at least as accurately as we can forecast demand. And secondly, the reason we built the grid is that no power plant is 24/7. They all break. So the idea that coal and nuclear plants are 24/7 and those are what will keep the lights on when solar and wind vary turns out not to be true. These big power plants break a lot. They are down about 11 or 12% of the time. And then you lose 1,000 megawatts in milliseconds, often without warning, often for weeks or months. And for that reason, grids have been built to handle that intermittence by backing up failed plants with working plants. And in exactly the same way, but often at lower cost, the grid can manage the forecastable variations of solar and wind power. So in the United States, our National Renewable Energy Lab has shown how to deliver reliable electricity from 80 or 90% renewable sources by forecasting and diversifying and integrating. And let me give you an example of how this can work. It's a difficult case. The Texas grid, which is isolated from the rest of the United States, and in 2050, you would expect its electric load to look like this during a summer week. If you use the electricity more efficiently, the load would be smaller and less peaky, but still over 30 billion watts. So let's do this all with renewables. The first 86% with a combination of wind and solar power. You can see how much they actually vary. And then the other 14% with other renewables that you can operate whenever you want. Geothermal, small hydro, solar thermal electric, burning municipal waste, burning biogas, And now we have 100% renewable electricity, but you can see it's not very well matched to the load shape. But as our next step, we can take the surplus electricity and put it into distributed storage, both ice storage, air conditioning, and smart electric vehicles, and then get it back when we need it and fill in the last gaps with unobtrusively flexible demand. Now all the moving parts fit together. We have completely reliable power every hour of the year without adding bulk storage. We didn't need a breakthrough in storage technology. And only 5% of the renewable generation is left over. So the economics should be very good. This is not just theoretical. Some countries' grid operators already do the choreography in this way, or you might think of it like the conductor of a symphony orchestra. Different pieces of different musical instruments play at different times, but there's always some nice harmonious sound going on. And we have probably all heard that the world's fourth biggest economy, Germany, got a quarter of its electricity from renewable sources last year. But actually 4 other European countries, not greatly rich in hydropower, already do twice that without adding bulk storage. Denmark at least 47%, Scotland 46%, Spain 45%, Portugal 58% renewable electricity for all of last year. And the lights stay on fine. In fact, Denmark and Germany have the most reliable electricity in Europe, about 10 times as reliable as we have in the United States. And this means that it's actually quite realistic to think about all renewable electricity if it's properly operated. And an important part of that is decentralizing the supply. Denmark, which has no hydropower, is an interesting example. 32 years ago, they used a lot of big thermal power stations burning coal. Now they use a constellation of wind farms in blue, 86% owned by farmers in their communities, and agricultural waste combined heat and power in brown. And they're also reorganizing their grid in a cellular architecture that makes cascading blackouts impossible. The same approach enabled Cuba to reduce its serious blackout days from 224 to 0 in 2 years in the 90s. And then the next year, 2 typhoons in 2 weeks shredded their eastern grid, and they still sustain vital services. By the way, it was Chinese aid and technical advice that made all that possible for Cuba. And it's a very good example for all of us. And such resilience in the Chinese grid would, I think, make the Chinese people much more secure in a country with earthquakes and floods and typhoons and other disasters, and whose long distances increase vulnerability to disruption. Now in America, we have this old, dirty, insecure electricity system, and we have to replace it anyway by 2050. So whatever we replace it with is going to cost about $6 trillion net present value. Whether we buy more of what we've got, or new nuclear and so-called clean coal, or renewables, either centralized or more distributed. But those 4 futures, all with about the same cost, have dramatically different risks around national security: fuel, water, finance, technology, climate, and health. 7 kinds of risk. For example, we have an over-centralized grid that is extremely vulnerable to cascading blackouts caused by bad space weather, bad earth weather, other natural disasters like our recent superstorm, cyber attack, physical attack. But that blackout risk disappears, and all 6 other risks are best managed if we choose distributed renewables reorganized into local microgrids that normally interconnect freely but can stand alone at need. So they disconnect fractally, they reconnect seamlessly. My own house works this way. It operates with or without the grid. The American military has adopted this strategy to power its bases so that they will work with or without the grid. Pursued nationwide at about the same cost as business as usual, I think this resilient grid architecture would maximize national security, customer choice, entrepreneurial opportunity, and innovation. So to summarize the electricity sector, together efficient use and diverse, dispersed, renewable, resilient supplies are starting to transform the whole sector. Formerly, utilities would buy a lot of big power plants and a little bit of efficiency of renewables, and we would reward those companies for selling us more electricity. We still do that in 36 of the 50 states, but in 14 other states, we've changed the rules to reward the utilities for cutting your bill, not for selling you more electricity. It's amazing what happens. The investments go other way up. They invest massively in efficiency, renewables, smart grid, ways to put all these pieces together reliably, cogeneration. And actually in 3/5 of the United States, flexible demand and energy efficiency can compete directly against power plants in the same auctions. And in general, the demand side resources win because they're cheaper. So our energy future is not fate but choice, and that choice is extremely flexible. In 1976, governments and industry all insisted in America that the energy needed to make $1 of GDP could never go down. I heretically suggested that it could drop by threefold. This was greeted with great derision. So far, it's dropped by twofold. It's looking pretty much on track. But now we have much more powerful technologies, integrative design, new financing and marketing and delivery methods, so we can do even better. And now we can see very clearly how to triple efficiency all over again at only 1/3 the cost that we used to think. So to solve the energy problem, we just needed to enlarge it and to integrate it. The results may at first seem incredible. They surprised even us. They surprised not only Director Dye, but many people. And yet, you know, as Marshall McLuhan said, only puny secrets, small, weak secrets need protection. He said, big discoveries are protected by public incredulity. They're safe because nobody believes it. Now, combine the efficiency-driven electricity and oil revolutions, and you have the really big story, Reinventing Fire, where the savings in white in the government forecasts are increased by further savings that those forecasts did not include but are well proven in industry. And a little bit is saved in more productive use of vehicles. Then we quintuple the renewable production. The natural gas share goes down by 1/3. And these things cost less than the nuclear and coal and oil resources, so they go away. They get displaced. And we see this starting to happen actually all around the world. And in the US case, this would save $5 trillion, grow the economy 2.6-fold, strengthen our security, and by the way, eliminating oil and coal, reduce the fossil carbon emissions 82 to 86%. Now, if you like any one or more of those outcomes, you could support this transition without needing to like every outcome and without needing to agree about which outcome is most important. So focusing on outcomes, not motives, can turn what in our country is a lot of political gridlock and conflict into a harmonious and unifying solution to our common energy challenge. And at the same time, these best buys are the most effective solutions to global problems that endanger every country's security and prosperity. It's encouraging that in the first 3 years of this 40-year journey, the key parameters, economic growth, renewable growth in production, and the energy needed and electricity needed to make $1 of GDP, have in the United States been closely tracking the Reinventing Fire targets that we set. This progress is actually described in a new brochure that today we have made available here both in Chinese and in English. And our team at our little institute is helping smart companies and governments to get unstuck and speed this journey by many sectoral initiatives and projects. Of course, there's still a lot of old thinking around too. The former oilman, Maurice Strong, said not all the fossils are in the fuel. But the former chairman of DuPont, Edgar Woolard, said that organizations hampered by old thinking won't be a problem, because in the long run they won't be around. What I've described here is not just a once-in-a-civilization opportunity for business and for public policy. It's one of the greatest transformations in the history of our species, because we humans are really inventing a new fire, not dug from below, but flowing from above. I've even heard of theologians talk about energy from hell and energy from heaven. And this new fire is quite different. It's not scarce but bountiful, not local but everywhere, not transient but permanent, not costly but free. And except for the transitional tail of natural gas and a little biofuel grown in ways that sustain and endure, this new fire is flameless and very efficiently used. It really could make energy do our work without working our undoing. Each of us owns a piece of this enormous prize. Our new book details how to capture that opportunity. This approach appears to have profoundly encouraging implications for Chinese national developments. Imagine a beautiful China in 2050 with an economy maybe 5 times as big as today, but using about the same amount of energy as today, and with maybe 70% of it coming from renewables. I think if you apply what we found in America to the Chinese situation, that would not be an unreasonable, very rough summary of what you might find. If these interlinked game changers that I've summarized can yield such surprising results by enlarging and integrating the American energy problem, what might they do in China? Well, we are seeking the answer to that question in collaboration with Dr. Dai's team at the Energy Research Institute, with other experts at the China branch of the Energy Foundation, which is also sponsored by the National Development and Reform Commission, and with Dr. Lynn Price's and Dr. Zhongnan's group at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratories China Energy Group. So with these 3 groups so deeply expert in China, we are seeking that answer that is so vital to the security and prosperity of both our countries and of the world. Together, I think we can help make the world healthier, richer, fairer, cooler, and safer by together reinventing fire. Thank you for your kind attention and your good.
好，我们谢谢我们卢教授的精彩的演讲，这个娓娓道来了他的这个未来的我们可持续的能源情景。这个他的报告呢，最后的结论大家看得非常清楚啊。 美国呢在2050年的时候可以做到无碳，不消耗煤，不消耗石油，不消耗天然气，还不用核能，完全可以利用上可再生能源。前面呢是通过交通、建筑、这个发电，还有工业4个部门来讲了怎么样去3倍的提高能源效率。中间呢给我们讲了可再生能源它不连续，成本高，一直是困扰我们的问题。但它在它的方案里面呢是完全能够解决了。那么接下来呢，我们大概按照这个时间的日程呢，大概还有20分钟供大家提问题。大家看一下有什么问题，好吧？那个下边的同志呢可以准备几个麦克，有问题呢可以用麦克，好吧？好，这边有一位女士呢。
你好 ，Dr. Amory， 你好，戴所长。我的问题是，就是我们公司也是做可再生能源的，我们是从国外进口废汽车到中国来拆解。那因为我刚才听 Dr. Amory 一直在讲汽车，就是说，现在汽车的保有量在全世界也是基本上，发达国家每个人都有1部汽车。那你们有没有研究，就是关于汽车，就是末端，就是对这些废的汽车，已经不能再用的汽车，对这个地球的一些影响，就是对地球污染的影响，然后包括有没有什么解决方案？因为我们公司在解决这个方面，就是解决废汽车对地球的影响，我们是全国第1家，就是全球也是比较排名的，但是我们还是遇到很多困难，就是好像关注在我们这个行业的人不多，也没有得到很大的支持，所以希望你们给我们提点建议，谢谢。
In Europe and in Japan, automakers, once they have made a car, own it forever. That is, when it is at the end of its life, they must figure out how to dispose of it. Therefore, they have a strong incentive to make it easily disassemblyable and recyclable. And this leads to better design and more frugal use of materials. In America, most of the steel, about 96%, I believe, from old autos is recycled into new uses. Not always in cars, because if it is even slightly contaminated with copper, as you know, it loses a lot of strength. So you would put it in lower quality uses. But the kinds of lightweight cars I described are even in a way more interesting at first for your business, because they will be made initially often of light metals, which are much more valuable than steel. Later on, when they're made of carbon fiber, they don't dent, rust, or fatigue, so they last almost forever. And then the automakers would probably want to lease the structural surface of the car body rather than selling it as a product. It would be like an airplane. The airframe may be 50 years old when you climb into an American plane, but it gets new engines, paint, seats, and avionics. So it acts as if it's new. As long as it is still structurally sound, it can fly. And like in the military, the B-52 bombers are flown by the grandsons and granddaughters of their original pilots, and they still have decades of life. So I think in the long run, you will probably have less of this business, except that there will be a lot more cars in the world, so maybe it won't get less. But we will be much better at designing for disassembly, repair, reuse, remanufacturing, and the business models will change. So there will be less waste. And this is true not just in cars, but in all industry. We will use more closed-loop manufacturing, circular economy, making things the way nature does, so there is no waste and no toxicity. Waste is something to be designed out. And that will make a much better world. Whether it's good or bad for your business, it's too early to tell, but I think you need to take this into account.
好，你的这个问题呢提得非常好。这个我们的汽车呢增长得非常快，2000年的时候呢200万辆，05年的时候呢500万辆，现在我们年产呢2000万辆。但是我们每1000人的汽车的保有量，现在全世界平均是每1000人150辆，我们中国才90辆，啊，所以随着生活水平的提高，汽车呢还得大幅度的增加。所以它的方案里面，大家看一下，就是实际上每个国家在完成工业化以后，它的能源呢是3分天下，就是交通耗1/3，产业耗1/3，建筑和生活耗1/3。我们现在呢是70%的呢是在工业，所以迅速增长的是交通，所以未来呢汽车还得大幅度的增长，能源呢还要大幅度增长。那如果我们按照罗安武先生刚才介绍的这个方案的话，我们真正实施电动汽车、碳纤维的汽车，那我们会大大的下降了。你的问题呢是把汽车回收了，怎么去利用？他有一个很好的建议，我不知道我们的汽车商在这儿没有。你是把它回收了、熔炼了钢铁再去利用，而且目前全世界都是这样的啊！而且刚才罗安武先生提到了，美国的钢铁是96%是回收利用的，我们现在说每年7亿吨的钢铁，就是我们迅速增长的基础设施建设啊，还得大量的需要新的钢铁来，他们是走完了这个路子了，建完了，所以回收利用就行了。但是他的方案里面呢，给你提了个方案，汽车制造商呢可以很好的制造好你的框架，然后呢，你回收利用是什么呢？回过去以后再换发动机。汽车坏了，并不是所有的汽车都坏了，而是这个框架如果能用的话呢，是最好了。那实际上在这个我们这个循环经济里面，你搞的就是循环经济，已经有这方面的这个做法。比如说这些工厂里啊，发动机可能坏了。那发动机坏了呢，实际上就它里面的一个轴某个部分呢磨损了。现在我们给它再修复一下，发动机就接着可以利用了。但现在呢，我们经常是汽车坏了就所有的都报废了，发动机坏了就都去报废了。所以在你这个循环经济里面、再用利用里面，你可以在这方面进行一些探讨。这样的话呢，可以减少一下一次钢铁的能耗啊。但钢铁这个问题呢，我们跟美国和发达国家的状况不一样，就是我们处在一个家园建设阶段啊，我们的道路、桥梁、汽车，它是一个增量阶段，所以我们每年的炼铁和炼钢的量差不多啊。他们就看96%的是用的废钢铁，废钢铁的电炉里面一炼能耗就非常低了，好吧？这个问题啊，牵扯的两头提得非常好，一个是汽车，第二个呢是我们的基础工业钢铁，好吧？好，谢谢。好，我们请这位女士。
因为刚才讲到这个汽车的事情啊，那么最好是新能源的汽车。那么新能源呢也有各种各样啊，有这个电动的，用锂电池，对吧？或者是用混合动力，或者用燃料电池。这个我不知道两位专家啊，就是有什么看法？就是说，对于整个世界来讲，哪个更有前途？对于中国来讲，哪个更有前途？这个事情是不是可以介绍一下？当然，这个还有一个问题呢，就是关于这个可再生能源不稳定的问题。现在呢，您刚才说到德国是做的最好的，在这个问题上呢，中国可能也有这个情况，就是主要是不稳定、不好用。这个我特别希望那个戴所长能够讲讲我们在这个方面到底怎么样？这两个问题啊。好的，谢谢。
我先说一下啊，一个呢，关于汽车的问题，究竟是什么是方向啊？看来呢，不是说哪一个来独揽天下，以后呢肯定是多元发展啊，包括了混合动力的、纯电动的，还有未来的燃料电池。燃料电池呢，现在主要是技术问题。那我个人认为，可能以特斯拉为代表的，将来以后的电动汽车呢，可能有很大的发展空间 啊。如果它真的是1个小时充满电，一次呢还能跑500公里，而且呢插的电源呢就是我们这个220的电压。科学技术的创新是无限的，我认为这2个问题在1、2年里面呢就能解决。到那个时候呢，我们北京的交通污染啊，就是排放的废气，上海排放的废气，我个人认为呢，可能就得到好的解决。而且呢，现在因为我们中国呢汽车快速增长，而液体燃料不足，啊，油价呢很高，所以我们一大堆的企业在那搞什么呢？煤制油、煤制甲醇、煤制二甲醚，对吧？这个是很糟糕的问题啊。当然，它从商业上来看呢，有很好的前景。但是呢，大家知道煤制油、煤制甲醇这个过程啊，是大量的消耗水，而且是一种深度的环境污染，要产生苯啊这些芳烃这一类型的东西。所以，如果电动汽车能解决了啊，那确实对我们来说是一个很大的福音啊。所以，关于汽车方面呢，我们就谈这些。那你刚才谈的第2个问题是，可再生能源不稳定呢？可再生能源呢，像风能和太阳能，我们看到卢先生的报告里面很好，他利用这现在的技术呢，完全给你切合，能解决了。但是我觉得，如果真的是这样的话呢，就很好。但我个人认为呢，它不是这样啊，因为风呢，当然呢，他举了法国这个例子，看一下他预测的负荷和第2天的负荷是差不多的。但我们中国的风力资源，风就是一阵风就来了，我都要接住，对吧？一阵风走了，我还要用煤电。那我们说绿色电力变成灰色的了，对吧？这个太阳能呢，我们可以预测啊。这个欧洲为什么搞的比例那么高呢？就是它在整个的电源系统当中，它有很好的集合、吆喝和调峰负荷。它的调峰负荷，风电来了的时候，它大部分是油电或者是气电。油电和气电最大的好处是说上就可以上去，说下就可以下得来，对吧？系统响应能力非常强。你们知道我们国家的电源结构是什么吗？是70%的是煤电。煤发电，你把这个火烧上去发的电的时候，你让它下来很费劲，下来了再烧上去也很费劲，所以系统响应能力不行。所以我们去年光风力发电就扔掉了200多亿千瓦时，扔的很多啊！就在我们西部建了一大堆风电啊，但是呢现在用不上。但这个问题我认为是短时的啊，这个前景呢我是相信呢，就像我们陆安武教授提的，比如说电动汽车啊，我们可以用 IT 技术，那边发风电的时候，我们这边正好充电。对吧？就是未来这些技术是可以想象、是可以解决的，但现在来看，确实存在这些问题。特别是中国呢，有12亿5千万千瓦的装机容量，对吧？70%是煤炭，对吧？那而且油和气啊，这个气电就是调峰负荷的这些电呢，又不是很多，所以来接纳、消纳、吸收风能和太阳能来说呢，是有一定的困难。但是呢，我觉得他给我们描写的这个蓝图啊，是非常好的，这是我们未来的方向，从技术上呢是可以解决的。好吧？那至于说发达国家呢，它为什么那么高？这个东西你不能光看那个数字就让我们国家也只要这么高，这个很难做到，好吧？那个研究里面啊，刚才说了一个研究里面，我们就要做这个路线图啊。
I'm sorry. Say again. Yeah. To start with your second question, the grid stability issue is different and rather complex in China, and part of our joint collaborative study with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and Energy Foundation China will examine this in detail with State Grid and other players in the Chinese electricity system. The model I mentioned that probably is the best around that our government used to explore 80 or 90% renewable futures is now being applied also in China, and we'll all be very interested in what it finds. If European experience is any guide, even countries like Germany that built their grid around their coal and nuclear stations have been able to adapt, but it takes probably 5 or 10 years for the grid operators to get comfortable with this new way of operating their assets. It's not overnight, but we found, for example, in Denmark, which has even more reliable electricity than Germany, they're probably the best in the world at operating variable renewables, and at times they have enough wind power to run all of Denmark with some left over for export. It's a small country and not heavily industrialized, but they have a lot of wind. So they have become very good at this, and at first their grid operators did not think this would work. But over about 10 years, they gained confidence and great competence in this. And they're excellent engineers. They do their job, the lights stay on. I think in time, this can also happen in China as we all learn more and the system adapts to the new opportunities. Because China leads the world in making solar power and wind power cheap. And you have immense resources of sun and wind and many others, but you also have the advantage of a lot of big hydro dams already installed. And these can be used along with flexible demand to help regulate the grid. Your first question about cars is much more complex, and there is no simple answer, except that I think there are many basic reasons to think that electric propulsion will win over mechanical engine-driven propulsion. The electric systems are becoming very rapidly cheaper. You mentioned lithium batteries. From 2010 till February this year, they became 43% cheaper in real terms, and they're about to drop by another probably 30%. And there are several other kinds of batteries that look even cheaper than that. The electric motors, the power electronics, the control systems are all improving rapidly. And electric systems are higher torque, higher reliability, much simpler, lighter, cheaper when you make a lot of them. I think their advantages are inherent. They have a much more flexible, big design space than the mature Victorian mechanical arts. But where the electricity comes from, whether from batteries or fuel cells or other combinations, it's too early to tell. I think they will all compete. And because the cars by then will be light and slippery, they'll need 2 or 3 times less energy to move them. So we can afford any of these systems, and probably different ones will win in different market segments. Competition is good. Innovation is good. We will have many more solutions than we need. That's all we need to know for now. We don't need to know what the answer will be, but it will unfold in time, and it will be much better than what we have today.
再给你补充一点的呢，就是这个风能和太阳能呢，过去我们发展呢，不能说犯了一个错误，但是呢，我们确实有经验这里面总结。过去我们是在大规模的在西部成片的发展，一搞500万千瓦、1000万千瓦，所以一阵风来了，我根本就接不住，是吧？现在呢是搞分布式的。德国人为什么这个可再生能源比例那么高呢？他就是在末端搞的，比如太阳能搞到我们这楼顶上去，对吧？风能呢搞到我们用户端，这样呢这些能源呢就可以利用了。所以现在国家的政策基本上是两头都发展，那边一方面大规模也要发展，更多的要搞分布式。那同时呢，储能技术也在不断的研发，对吧？这几个加起来以后，像他描写的那个情景，我认为是有可能实现的。好，还有谁？
老师
Let me, if I may, let me add a point to this. It's, I don't remember the Chinese proverb, but there's one that says that sometimes something nearby and not perfect may be better than something perfect but far away. Well, this is true also in energy, say in renewable energy. We used to think that we had to put all the wind farms in the very windy places in the west and north of China and build huge transmission lines we thought the same thing in Germany or in America, but then we found that the less good but still decent wind resources nearby are just as economical. And there are new kinds of wind machines that run well at low and moderate wind speeds and produce electricity much of the time. And that changes the picture completely. So there is a big rethinking going on worldwide about these resources as we realize that what matters is the cost and reliability of the electricity wherever you are, and the theoretically best resources a very long distance away may not be so good by the time you get them delivered.
好，时间问题呢，我们再来2个问题。这位先生，麦克。
Hi, my name's Dan. I'm from Australia. A few years ago in Australia, there was a group called Zero Carbon Australia, and they did some very similar work to you, but they relied quite heavily on centralised storage, so particularly the molten salt storage. I think everyone knows that there's a lot of work to do to get to zero carbon on intelligence and storage. You seem to have relied more on distributed storage, Dr. Amory. So in your thoughts, is there a role for centralised storage to play in this future? And secondly, for Mr. Dai, in the short term, do you see a future for storage in an application for energy storage in China?
There may be good uses for centralized storage if it becomes cheap. The cheapest method we know now, except in very special situations, is compressed air storage underground, usually in caverns mined with water from salt deposits. And this is reasonably affordable, but if you think about all the ways to make the grid flexible, bulk storage and fossil fuel backup plants are the most expensive ways to make the grid flexible, so we would do them last, not first. Before that, you would diversify your renewable portfolio by type and location, so they don't all see the same weather at the same time and they respond to it differently. That is, sunny, calm days are good for solar, bad for wind. Stormy days are bad for solar, good for wind, and different weather in different places. You would forecast the renewables. You would integrate them with dispatchable renewables. All kinds except photovoltaic and wind can operate whenever you want. You would integrate them with demand response. You would integrate them with distributed storage, ice storage, air conditioning, and smart electric vehicles. That's probably enough to solve the problem, as I showed in the Texas simulation. If you wanted more, of course, you could try bulk storage or fossil fuel backup. But so far, it does not appear this is necessary, at least in most cases. We don't know yet what the specific Chinese answers will be, probably different in different parts of the country.
你的问题呢提得很好，因为在卢先生的报告里面好像没有大谈储能技术，对吧？因为我们认为利用风能和太阳能的话，它的不连续性、它的客观属性决定了用起来不好用，所以大家都研究储能。但是他的研究结论呢，就是在供端和需端你调节好了的话呢，也没问题。但是我个人的意见，储能技术应该是很具，无论是从全球来看，还是从中国来看，是需要研究的。如果你真想用上非化石能源时代的话，那太阳能和风能的这种不连续性就决定了你最好有一种很好的储能技术来调节我们的负荷。但问题是到现在我们感到呢，就是除了水电就是抽水蓄能这一种大规模的储能技术以外，还没有找到大规模的这种储能的这种技术材料刚才谈了这个盐水的地下这些，但这些成本呢都还非常高，所以我个人认为呢。无论是从中国还是全球， 储能技术研究的潜力呢，应该是非常大的，对吧？那它也可以小型化，对吧？将来以后呢，家庭啊或者单位啊可以储起来，这样呢使我们的这个负荷呢进行平滑，对吧？白天和夜间都可以去调整，啊。好，最后一个问题啊，因为我们的程序的时间问题。好，那位先生。
这个就是在去年2013年2月份的时候，国家电网是作为它改革它所有制的一部分，它向民间开放了这个分布式发电并网的这个权限。所以我现在有个问题想给这个戴所长，就是我们国家在未来下一步鼓励这个民间力量，包括社会力量进入这个可分布式发电方面有什么其他的后续的鼓励的政策吗？然后还有给那个 Dr. Lovins， 就是想请问一下，在美国这个可持续性发电并网方面，我们有什么在这个商业解决方案上有什么值得我们可以学习借鉴的方面吗？谢谢。
这个你已经注意到，去年我们就已经发了文件了。其实今年呢，前2天也发了文件了，就是要鼓励分布式的这种能源的发展啊。这个呢，可能过去呢你在末端搞了以后，电网不让你上，对吧？现在呢，我们大的电网国网啊已经放开这个，那我想呢，其他网呢都可以解决，是吧？但是问题是呢，现在分布式能源，包括太阳能、风能，对中国来说还有一个叫末端的天然气发电啊，热电冷3联产这几个，对于末端来说呢，成本非常高。对吧？就是你的太阳能的上网电价，风能的这个上网电价，还有呢，天然气现在1个立方米买过来3块钱，在上海这个地方要3块钱，你搞了以后成本的问题。所以下一步呢，就是除了让你上网，要考虑把环境的外部性纳进来以后，怎么样去从财务上就鼓励这方面的发展。我想呢，这个方面呢，可能要向做得比较好的德国啊、日本这些国家呢，我们有些经验可以交流。在这方面大方向是没有问题的啊，但是呢，具体的我也知道，比如说你家有一个别墅啊，你上了这个太阳能发电啊，能不能去给你上得去，有没有这样的政策支持？但具体的呢，现在呢，在不同的地区呢，现在是先示范，然后呢再大面积的推广，好吧？
In 32, I think, of the United States, including mine, if you generate your own renewable electricity, you can run your meter backwards and get either complete or partial credit for the cost of the electricity you would otherwise have bought. We do have 2 states, Iowa and South Dakota, that are over 1/4 wind-powered today, and they operate without problem. We don't have yet a state that is about half renewably powered, except from hydropower in the Northwest, say. So we don't have an example as good as, say, Denmark or Portugal. Portugal is interesting because it's out on the end of the European grid. It's only interconnected to Spain, and they went from 17 to 58% renewable electricity in something like 10 years. But we do have some interesting institutional innovations. And it's quite an exciting time because in Hawaii, where they have expensive oil-fired electricity, it is now worthwhile to put solar power on your roof, as 10 or 15% of the houses have done on the island of Oahu, and put in batteries, as many have done, and drop off the grid. It's cheaper than buying the grid power. So our institute recently did a report called The Economics of Grid Defection, showing that this sort of economics, making it just as cheap not to be on the grid and still get the same service because solar and batteries get cheaper, that would sweep across the United States over a few decades, but within the lifetime of existing utility assets. And this means the old business models have no place to hide. And as a result, Barclays downgraded the bonds of all the American utility industry because they are at such competitive risk. But there are examples already outside Hawaii. In San Diego, 2.5 years ago, the head of the electric company told me in 2 or 3 years, so around now, he expected so much solar generation by his customers that his fossil fuel stations would be turned off every afternoon. This is becoming a big problem for utilities that expect you to buy their electricity forever and don't realize you can make it yourself and also save it yourself, cheaper than buying from them. But we're working with a little publicly owned utility in Fort Collins, Colorado, which noticed that 15% of its area consists of houses that are designed to the newest standard of zero net energy. That is, they will produce, say from solar cells like my house does, at least as much energy each year as they use. But if the utility sells kilowatt hours and those houses use zero net kilowatt hours per year, that means zero net revenue to the utility each year. That's not a very good business model. So they have developed a new one with some help from our institute that I call a bidirectional value tariff. It means the utility and the customer pay each other the fair value of the services that they exchange. Sometimes I sell electricity to my electric company, sometimes they sell me wind power. It all evens out over the year. And we each provide services other than the electricity itself. I help them regulate the grid. I improve their power quality. I produce especially at peak times when it's worth the most to them. They provide a backup for me, and so on. And as we start to learn the value of these kinds of services by careful studies around the country, we find it's often enough to pay for the whole cost of a solar power system. So the economics, the business and revenue and regulatory models are undergoing huge change in America, and our institute has assembled many of the leaders of the electricity industry in a safe place where the incumbents and the insurgents, or the defenders and the attackers in this competition, can actually meet together and create value together. This is a very exciting time because together we are inventing the next electricity industry. That's what I meant earlier when I said this industry has the most diverse and profound disruptions coming at it of any sector. We're right there now. Those disruptions are rocking the industry to its foundations. And I think in a few countries like the United States and some in Europe that are at the forefront of that institutional and business revolution, we are learning things that I think in China you will carefully consider, accept some, reject some, improve on all of them, and we will all learn faster together from our collaboration to create a stable, renewable Chinese electricity system. Thank you.
好，时间的问题呢，我相信大家呢可能还有好多感兴趣的问题。时间问题呢，我们就到这儿了。大家提的问题都非常好，但是呢，有些问题呢还真的需要大家去思考啊。比如说，一般的都会提问他：你那个汽车轻量化了以后，那个碳纤维能回收吗？要不回收的话，对地球会产生什么影响啊？对吧？这些问题都是存在的，这些问题都值得我们去探讨。另外呢，他特别强调了，就是我们90年代初期建立起来的这种体制和机制和这种思维方式，与新的这种模式怎么去结合？ 所以要我们的思维方式不能是惯性思维，要有跨越式的、跳跃式的。所以保证实现这一个目标，结论是技术上没问题，但问题是你的体制和机制啊，成本上也没问题啊。这个应该是说基本的方向是没问题的。好吧，这一段就结束，我们把下边的主持呢交给我们林女士。
谢谢，谢谢戴所长精彩的主持，还有这一方面重要的研究。Dr. Amory Lovins, I think we are very grateful for the wonderful presentation. That I think there are a lot of facts and forecasts that we need to digest. And I had dinner with Al Gore 2 weeks ago, and I mentioned to him that I will be meeting you and we are hosting you for a 3 talk. And he mentioned that, oh, Amory, he always has like this, I think his words was almost like rotating rosters of facts. And he said that, what is annoying is that he always gets them right. So, 今天也是，让我们给他们一个热烈的感谢，组长，谢谢。今天也是一个就是很特别的日子，因为Dr. Amory 说过，他的上一本书是叫《自然资本 （Natural Capitalism）》，也是在上海发布的。当时是上海的前市长，当时他市长的时候，徐光地市长为他发布他的第一本书，也是非常成功的一本我们非常推荐这一本书。那今天的书，我们为什么说他是绿色行动之父？因为他也是以身作则，他的家真的刚才也是做了这个例子，所以是一个很特别，也是我们很多共同朋友，包括这个学习新组织之父彼得圣吉，Michael Totten 很多朋友的他们一直以来都合作了很多年。那今天我们这本书可能在后面也是有他的出版商也是在后面。那待会儿会有新书的签名仪式。那我们现在先就是感谢这2位我们的主持还有我们的讲师谢谢。这个礼品是残疾人做的，也是碳，但是这个是可以净化的碳，这是中国残疾人的一些手工品谢谢。可能我们也是可能。